Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. We are here today to talk about our most anticipated upcoming releases, pretty much just for spring of 2025. So the stuff that is coming out within the next couple of months. We obviously we'll want more books that are coming out later in the year, but we'll probably, if we do this again, we might do it again later in the year and talk about those. But for now, we're doing this, mostly because we're now in the bad times, the stressful times, and we want to talk about things that we can be hopeful about. So yeah, we're being excited about the books that are coming out, and we're going to talk about them. Yeah, so we each got 5 books. We're gonna go through what those are and why we want to read them. And hopefully you enjoy. Maybe you'll hear about something you hadn't heard about before and you'll get something new to add to your TBR.
So, shocking absolutely no one. All of mine are romances because, as Michaela said, we are in the bad times. And it is important to read nice things. Obviously, I'll still be doing my political science and all that type of stuff on the side. But I wanted to, again, we switched out what we were going to talk about nice things and put positivity into the world and uplift people. So, I'm not going to talk about any of my nonfiction picks because, listen, none of them are fun. So we're going to stick to romances. And so the first one that I want to talk about is coming out at the end of March, and it's called Just Our Luck by Denise Williams. I have not reviewed one of her books in a while, but there was a while on the channel where I think I was reviewing one of Denise Williams' books like every single year. And I don't know if she like slowed down her production schedule or if I just missed some, but there are a bunch of her other books on this channel, starting with How to Fail at Flirting, and I have just adored them. They are often interracial, they talk about plus size women, and they're these contemporary romances that just deal with issues as well as the romance. And I don't mean that in like a bad way, but it just means that like these are two people in a relationship that have real lives and they have real issues in those lives, and they come together and they deal with them. This one seems like maybe a little bit more cutesy. I'm not sure. Obviously, I haven't read it. But the tagline of this one is a lottery ticket plus donuts equals love in the steamy new fake dating romance. So basically, the plot of this one is Sybil Sweet, who is a plus size, appears to be African American, as Denise Williams is, a woman who buys a lottery ticket that ends up being a winning lottery ticket, but she accidentally leaves it in this bakery run by a guy named Kieran, who wanted to be a doctor, but abandoned med school to take over his family's bakery, trying to save it. He's exhausted, he's broke, um, and that's where Sybil like loses the lottery ticket. Apparently, in some way, he goes to return it, and the internet decides that it's a grand romantic gesture, and the video goes viral. And they decide to kind of fake date because both of them are in these financial dire straits. And it sounds like those feelings may come to love. It's a romance novel. They will. But, it seems really cute and sweet. I love the cover. I love the idea. I'm not a huge fake dating person, but this one at least seems to have a purpose. Sometimes fake dating makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I've really, really loved Denise Williams's books in the past. I highly recommend all 3 of the ones. I think there's at least 2 or 3 that I reviewed on the blog, that you can go look at. They're just really good.
Okay. Um, I'm not always uplifting in the way that Gretchen's romance books are. In like that, the books that I read are not generally always like happy-go-lucky, fluffy stuff, which isn't a problem. Like obviously, I also read romance. But you will find some darker themes on my list because I'm me. And we're gonna keep that rolling by starting out with some horror. Why not? We know me. I'm gonna be over
You
here.
this is why we're 2 people. We
Yeah.
balance each other out.
Exactly. So the first pick on my list actually comes out this month. It is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. which, as far as I can tell, seems to be a retelling of Carmilla. It is a queer book, sapphic in nature, sapphic vampires. If you haven't read Carmilla, it was like the sapphic version to Dracula. Instead of there being a homoerotic relationship between a guy and a vampire, it's a homoerotic relationship between a woman and a vampire. This appears to be a retelling of that story. Um, if you didn't know, one of my first books of the year this year, my first 5-star, was a historical book. So I figured that I would try to maybe pick up some more historical stuff that isn't war books, because I think that that's what my issue was when I say that I don't like historical, is that the vast majority of things that I see coming out tagged historical are like, let's fall in love during World War II, and I don't enjoy that. I have the same problem with those that I do with like romantasy, where I'm like, you're fighting a war, why are you kissing? It doesn't make sense. But things set in the past that have nothing to do with war seem to be okay. So we'll see how I do with this one. Yeah, I don't know. Queer, vampire, sapphic. What more do I need out of a book?
So the next one on my list comes out on the 1st of April. And I cannot tell you how excited I am about this book. This is Beth O'Leary's new book, Swept Away. And first of all, the cover is gorgeous. Um, Beth O'Leary, generally, I've read a bunch of her books, including The Flat Share and The Road Trip and The Wake Up Call. The Wake Up Call was the last one by her that I read, and I did review that on the channel. And it was a little bit lighter than her usual fare because normally Beth O'Leary has this incredibly subtle way of creating like a lot of emotion in the relationship. So, for example, in the flat share, these were two people who were sharing a room, but they each had it for a different 12 hours. So they were communicating by post it note, and she builds a relationship that way. So that's what I mean. It's just like incredible. Um, this one, Swept Away, really reminds me of one of my favorite novels by her, which was The Road Trip, which was a second chance romance where two exes were literally like trapped in a car going to a mutual friend's wedding, and talk about literally having nowhere to go, right? It's them, the car, and their literal and figurative baggage. You can see my review for more on that. But this one, Swept Away, is two strangers who decide to have a one night stand. And there's clearly some stuff going on from the blurb. Zeke is our main character, and he's only back in town for the weekend to buy back his late father's houseboat. So there's probably some grief stuff there. And Lexi, our female main character, has no time for dating when she needs to help take care of her best friend's daughter. Again, don't really know what that means. But anyway, Zeke and Lexi have a one night stand, and in the houseboat. And it turns out that no one tied the houseboat to the dock. So when they wake up, they are just like in the middle of water with no land in sight. And they are trapped on this idle houseboat together with like limited supplies. So again, it feels like the road trip in the sense that like they're literally like stuck in this boat,
Mm.
with like the survival quotient quite heightened.
Forced
I'm going to
proximity, but
assume
also danger.
I know. But I really like that instead of like, I do really like romances where there's like a lot of family and friends and there's like a lot of stuff going on, but there is something to be said for these romances that are just have to be focused on these two people, like talking with each other and hanging out with each other. Um, which is why I feel like a lot of people do like forced proximity, but this is like the book.
Yeah.
The book is forced proximity, not like, oh, there's only one bed for this one night, right? So I'm really, really excited for that one.
My next pick, I think, is quite a popular release. I think a lot of folks will know of this, but just in case you hadn't heard about it, one of the authors from This Is How You Lose the Time War has a new novella coming out. Amal El Motar has the book The River Has Roots coming out. It is fantasy. It's a short little novella, which you know that I super enjoy, especially in like fantasy settings. This one seems to follow two sisters that live in a town that's on the edge of fairy. And one of them, I think, is being set up with a suitor, but she chooses to reject the like human suitor in favor of a fairy. Um, putting herself, her family, everybody else in jeopardy in that way. That's about all that I know about this one, which was enough. And also it being by Amal El Motar, I loved This Is How You Lose the Time War, as many people did. I'm really glad that that one ended up blowing up online. So yes, I'm very excited for this one. The cover is very pretty, and highly likely that I'll read it in like one sitting because it's under 150 pages. So I'm sure that it will be quick and lovely to devour.
My next book is coming out on the 8th of April, and I am cautiously excited for this one. I kind of feel like I have to talk about it because it comes out in our time frame, and You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel is one of, if not my favorite romance book of all time. Unfortunately, since You Deserve Each Other and then Twice Shy, which was the book that followed that, both of which I reviewed on the blog, I haven't been a super fan of Sarah Hogel's new stuff. Last year, she came out with the first book, and most of these have been all standalones, but last year she came out with the first book in a magical romance series called the Moonville series, and that first book was called Old Flames and New Fortunes. Again, I did do a full review of this, but it's essentially, this series seems to be set around some sisters who are witches. And the first one was a second chance romance, and that's like my top trope right now. And it just really didn't hit right for me all that much, but I did still really enjoy it. The Her new book in the series is called The Folklore of Forever, and this one is Enemies to Lovers. Um, and I really did like this sister, Zelda, from the previous book. I think she's really feisty. She's also a writer. Um, and she's also like a paranormal skeptic, which is really funny. Like, even though she comes from a family of like magic and witches, she's like, how, like, there's not this, some of this stuff just like doesn't isn't how this works. There is another character who's going to be her love interest who was also introduced in the last book. His name is Morgan, and you saw them have like a not so meet cute in the first book where they like clearly were just like clashing. And this one, he's also like kind of like a writer type of person. And this says that Morgan ropes her into a ghost hunting romp, um, only for Zelda to discover something else bizarre, never before seen creatures that appear as ordinary pets to everyone else. So it seems very silly, and potentially with this dynamic maybe a little bit less toxic than I felt like the relationship was in the first book. Um, because I really, really know that Sarah Hogel has the capacity to just like make me laugh hysterically while really loving these like enemies to lovers plots, like You Deserve Each Other. So I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
My next pick comes out like the middle of March. I just realized I haven't been telling you when those other books came out. So maybe when I edit them, they'll have had the dates written on there somewhere. I don't know. They're coming out in the next couple of months. But my next one does come out in the middle of March, and that is Stag Dance by Tori Peters, who you might recognize as the author of Detransition Baby, which was a literary trans book that came out a couple years ago and was quite popular. This also trans book, I thought it was short stories, but it's a novel and a couple of stories tacked on together, all using transness as a theme. I don't think I've ever seen a collection of short stories have a full novel and extra stories. Like, I feel like usually it's like a novella length at most, but we'll see how it goes. I obviously always prioritize queer books. This is something that I've made a point to do in the last several years. But here it is again, me looking at queer books, especially right now in the current political climate, me trying to say with my money and my voice, please give us more queer books, especially more trans books, because they in particular are under attack right now. So yes, Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I have not actually read Detransition Baby, so I can't say whether or not I like Tori Peters as an author yet, but I know that it was very popular. So I figured, as someone who quite enjoys short stories and obviously wants to prioritize more trans literature in my reading, that it would be a good one to pick up. I've also been reading more literary based stuff, although this isn't Like there's supposed to be one story in here that's science fiction based, so it's not purely like lit thick. It does have some speculative elements to it, which again, we know I love as a reader. I think the main story involves Paul Bunyan lumberjacks that use dancing magic question mark. I don't know, or maybe it's to entertain them. It's a bit weird. I like a weird book. I don't know. It's probably going to be right up my alley, so I'm excited for it.
So my next book is probably of no surprise to anyone. The 22nd of April, Emily Henry is coming out with a new book called Great Big Beautiful Life. Every single one of Emily Henry's books has just like not only been an enjoyable experience, but like just hit me all up in my feels. Her last one, Book Lovers, that I read was probably one of the ones that was just kind of like more on the cutesy side. But for example, I did read Happy Place by her as well. And Happy Place in particular is just, oh, it's like a friend group that's like kind of like moving on and like fracturing in their life. And there's that, oh, my feelings. Also, sorry, I misspoke. It wasn't Book Lovers, it was the last one that I read. It was Funny Story. Book Lovers and Funny Story both deal with writers and readers, and it's a little confusing. But anyway, Book Lovers was very cute. Funny Story was like, okay. Anyway, the reason this is all getting confused in my head is because Great Big Beautiful Life is also about writers. Is like a theme. But basically, this is two writers who are competing for the chance to like write a biography about um, a woman who may or may not be a tragic heiress, former tabloid princess, and daughter of one of the most storied and scandalous families of the 20th century. Like they're not even like sure that this is the real person. But anyway, both Alice, who is a writer who is still trying to make a break, and Hayden, who has apparently at some point won a Pulitzer Prize, are invited to this little island where supposed Margaret lives. Um, the blurb is like not clear that she's actually who she is pretending to be. And they have a month to basically convince Margaret that each of those, they're the person to tell her story. This does seem to be set up as a grumpy sunshine. Hayden is described as a human thundercloud, so that's like my tell for that. But one of the things that really, really struck me is at the end of this, the blurb reads, but the problem is Margaret is only giving each of them pieces of her story, pieces they can't swap to put together because of an ironclad NDA. And they also are being distracted by their feelings for each other. But I thought that that was really interesting. This idea that there's also like a bigger story here going on, and they're literally only getting pieces of it. Which is again seems to be one of those like extra added layers that stories, maybe like Funny Story, didn't have, that I think will make this book extra special. I'm really, really looking forward to it.
My next pick is Eat the Ones You Love by Sarah Maria Griffin. I believe this one comes out at the end of April. I think if you see that cover, it's probably clear that this one is a horror book. To me, it was giving Little Shop of Horrors vibes because it follows a woman who gets a job at a florist shop. And within the florist shop, there is an orchid that is clearly monstrous. It wants to consume people, and it's obsessed with the owner of the flower shop and would like to consume her. And it's going to enlist the help of this new person who's coming in to help work at the flower shop to finally get to eat the owner of the flower shop. So again, yes, very Little Shop of Horrors vibes, as far as like plant that eats people type thing. Again, it seems to be LGBTQ plus, which is always a note in my book of like something I want to pick up. It does seem to be like either a post-pandemic story or at least tangentially related to the pandemic. It mentioned that the reason that our protagonist is getting this job at the flower shop is because she recently moved back home after the pandemic. So if you are not a person that is ready to work with things that have stuff related to the pandemic, maybe not this one for you, but it looks super good for me. And again, horror, fantasy, queer. That's all I needed to hear to want to pick it up, honestly.
So my last book seems super interesting. It also comes out at the end of April, and it is called Anywhere You Go by Bridget Morrissey. I have reviewed two of Bridget's other books on the blog. One was A Thousand Miles, which was a road trip romance. And then the one that really, really got me was That Summer Feeling. This was a sapphic, queer, found family romp, really. It was this wonderful, like, a whole bunch of people end up at an adult summer camp, either to relive the nostalgia of doing that as children, or like one of our female main characters, because they never got that experience as children, to reconnect with, she goes with her sister to like reconnect with her sister. But it's like this lovely queer love story with zero angst. Like, I kept waiting, that 75% of the way through thing happens, and I was just like, oh, this is just nice, which like never happens. And whenever I think of that book, I just get warm fuzzies. Um, Anywhere You Go also seems to be um, very interesting in terms of the plot, because our two main characters are not falling in love with each other.
Oh.
So, this is a small town waitress and a big city Broadway press agent swap homes to escape the messiness of their personal lives, only to find new purpose and new love. So there are two female main characters here, Tatum and Eleanor. Um, for whatever reason, they decide to swap houses. And so Tatum, who's never left her small Midwestern town, um, ends up like living in the big city. And then Eleanor, who's been living in New York, as a Broadway press agent, ends up in this small town in the Midwest. So there seems to be some family drama in Tatum's hometown. And Tatum has a charismatic older sibling named Carson, who's charming Eleanor. And Tatum ends up in the high-rise apartment in New York with a woman named June, who is a regular friend of Eleanor's, who they start to have feelings. Um, I am fascinated just by the concept. I certainly have never read a romance novel like this. Again, while I do like the idea of like swept away, being trapped on the boat, this one really seems to have a lot going on in it, which is something that I like to like, it's not all about just like these are two like stick figures and they kiss, right? These are clearly two people with two developed lives, two different like settings that this is happening in, families, friends, all that type of stuff that hopefully will be very well developed. Again, there was a really strong queer found family feeling in That Summer Feeling, which may be something that's replicated here. Because I feel like there's a lot of ways for this book to feel uneven or go, be too much. But I really, really loved That Summer Feeling, and I am excited by the uniqueness of this book. Um, and I'm excited.
Yeah, it definitely sounds it's like the holiday, but not wintertime.
That's what the thing was. The one blurb that I saw was like, it's queer the holiday.
Yeah. So, my last pick is actually a favorite author that has a new one coming out, and that is Overgrowth by Mira Grant. If you didn't know, Mira Grant is a pen name for Shauna Maguire. She uses Mira Grant for specifically like the horror books that she writes, as opposed to the like more fantasy books that she writes under Shauna Maguire, like Every Heart Your Doorway, which we have reviewed on the channel. Um, Several years ago, I read Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, and that was one of my all-time favorite horror books. Every other Mira Grant book that has come out since then has been part of her like long-running series. This is the first time we're getting like a standalone Mira Grant book in a while. It looks like she's been publishing under Shauna McGuire, but this one's the first time we're getting that. Um, it seems to be an alien story, which I don't have a lot of. So sci-fi horror. Apparently there is a 3-year-old girl who's been telling anyone who has listened that she's an alien disguised as a human, and that the armada that left her here on Earth is coming back for her. And no one has been willing to listen to her. So we get this like kid that's like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm an alien, and also there's a war fleet that's gonna come back." And everyone's like, "Silly kids, because you don't know anything. That's so silly." It sounds like that was correct. um, Shannon McGuire and Mira Grant's books are usually generally queer. Again, the way that Into the Drowning Deep was written was great. It had some like really great interesting twists on the tropes. So I'm expecting this to be a new or interesting way to go at an invasion narrative. It has like plant stuff, so I'm wondering if these aliens are like plant-based on the cover. Like it's interesting. But yes, I love almost everything I've ever written by Shannon McGuire, especially under Mira Grant. I've read a couple. Into the Drowning Deep is still one of my all-time favorite horror books of all time. And she always does an interesting job playing with tropes. So yes, this is my last pick, and it's I think the only one that's like definitely a favorite author pick. Like some of those I haven't read from before, but this one is definitely one that I'm like fairly certain I'm gonna love just because I love everything the author writes.
Well, even though we did these by date, right? That was it. Turns out that Michaela chose an excellent one to end on to allow me to talk about the other Betwixt content that we are doing in February. So in honor of February, Valentine's Day, us trying to put love and positivity back in the world, we have a themed reading roundtable that will be coming out this month, and they are all monster romances. A reading roundtable participant suggested this topic as a joke, I think, originally, and we were like, no, actually, that's a great idea. Michaela has talked about this before, that monster romances can do really interesting things with body, with queerness, with, all that type of stuff. And I have talked about before how sometimes they're just weird. And I have questions of like, what is the tentacle doing? So
Just go with it.
we just go in. Um, Michaela really likes to read them. I'm on the fence about them. But we do know that whatever happens, we already have our participants obviously locked in. And whatever everyone brings is going to be very ridiculous, completely like the only thing that we said is monster romance. So who knows what monsters will appear? Aliens may appear. We opened it to that as well. So the only thing we do know, I think, about this particular reading roundtable is that it's going to be a particular level of ridiculousness we may have not previously reached. So we really hope that you are excited for that as well. We know that it's a stressful time, a hard time. And, we will continue to do the serious work and the hard work in our own lives, but we are choosing for this time at least on our channel to put some uplift some authors, put love on these authors, and put some silliness into lives with some monster romances. So that's how we're getting by. um so if you are very excited for any of the releases that we talked about, please let us know down in the comments which ones you're also interested in. If you think based on the releases that we talked about that there are some other ones that should be on our radar, please also drop those down below in the comments and let people know like why they also may like them, because there's a range, right? I did a lot of romance. Michaela did a lot of like horror and darker stuff. So like just suggest to people
Mm.
which side of the coin would be potentially interested in that. And we'll be back with a very, very silly Betwixt episode plus our own reviews later on this month. Thanks, guys. Bye.